Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you had a really good week. My name is Charlie Carroll. I'm the founding pastor here at City Church, where our purpose is to help people experience the fullness of God's love through relationship. And so welcome to all of you who are here in person with us today. It's good to see people getting back out. And then welcome to those of you who are tuning in this morning from all over the place via Facebook Live. We are jumping into the third week of our series, Above the Crowd, where we are looking at the 11th chapter of Hebrews to see what faith looks like in action. There are these words that we use all the time that because we've been raised with them, or maybe we hear them or think about them often, that we tend to lose, or we can lose the sense of significance or the purpose of those words. And so when we started planning this series months ago, the goal was to try to make the word faith like as real and impactful as possible. To almost deconstruct the word to see how we can get it to serve us in light of maybe hearing about it our whole life. So looking at the 11th chapter of Hebrews, what does faith look like in action? More than what you've heard, more than what you've experienced. Like, what does this word faith look like in action or in the lives of other people? And I just want to read verse 1, because verse 1 starts off and really tells us what faith is about. Like, why even have faith? What is the purpose of faith? And so the author in the 11th chapter, before going into like all of these actions and things that people did because of this word faith, tries to give us in one verse the reason or the purpose, the idea of what faith is about. So let me read the first verse of Hebrews chapter 11. It says, "The fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors and set them above the crowd." When I was little, my dad had a safe that he kept a collection of pennies in that he had from when he was really young, and it was super heavy. And because it was heavy, by the time my brother and I got to it, which, when your parents have a safe that is locked, like, it's fascinating for no other reason than it's locked. And I can remember how awkward it was to handle this safe, because the handle was on top of it, and because of how heavy it had been, at some point in time, it lost its handle. And so when you tried to carry it or hold it or move it from one place to the other, you had to hold it awkwardly, especially as a little kid with small hands, because it had no handle. And see, this is true when I read this verse pertaining to Hebrews chapter 11. The author says that we have been given faith to put handles on life, to be able to carry and get through our life with a handle to it through this one word. And so what you can easily understand is, if you get rid of the idea of faith, you're going to have a hard time handling your life. That there are a lot of things that are thrown at us through all of the different phases of our life that we need a handle for. And what the author is saying here is, if this level of trust does not exist in this invisible force for good, watching over you and guiding you, if you're willing to go along with the process, you are going to have a hard time getting a handle on things. And those of us that are older, which, depending upon how old you are in this room, you laugh at somebody that is in their early 40s saying those of us that are older, but age is relative. The older you get, the more you understand the need for faith is not a one and done thing. It's an all the time thing. And we keep growing and evolving and maturing and taking on new difficulties and experiencing new fears and new obstacles. And so there is never a need for no faith. We will never wake up and find ourselves in a place where there is not a need for faith. And the older you get, the more you realize you need this handle in order to be able to carry the things that you are confronted with or you do not understand. If you're not in that place right now because you feel as if life is pretty good and you understand everything, hopefully that is just a temporary resting place for you on your journey up the mountain. We'll never be happy or satisfied with a level of life that does not require faith. And so faith is this fundamental fact of existence, this trust in God. It's a firm foundation by which everything that makes life worth living. Last time I was with you, and really just summarizing this idea, I said that if it always has to make sense, it will always make sense. And you're not going to be happy with a life that makes sense. You were made to live life and experience life at a level that is more abundant than what you can provide for yourself. And so if you're sad or discouraged or anxious or fearful this morning, it could be a very good thing in that you want to take on and experience things that are bigger than yourself, and that's why God gave you the tool called faith, so that everything doesn't have to make sense. Just quickly, whether you're here in the room with me or you're somewhere else in your own room, tuning in via Facebook this morning, if you'll just take your right hand and put it on your chest. And just for 1 second, let's become aware of the things that we are so committed to making sense when we just need to let them go and be okay with them not making sense for a while. Just a commitment to everything not making sense. And we can release these things by faith. Setting up verse 23 in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, we see that the author begins to focus on the way faith confronts opposition and hostility. This would be a subject that the author's audience was very familiar with. What happens when you get on your path and you're being opposed or you're experiencing hostility? What does faith look like in action when you are being opposed or things are not going well? I'll read beginning in the 23rd verse. It says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict." If you go back to the book of Genesis and Exodus, you know that Moses was born during a time where the Hebrew people were living in Egypt, and they were rapidly growing as a population so fast while slaves there that the king made a decree that all baby boys, all Hebrew baby boys, needed to be put to death. And Moses' parents, when they saw him, recognized that there was something special about him and decided that they were going to keep him and try to hide him for 3 months versus killing him like they were supposed to do. This is a documented historical fact that the Hebrew people were killing their children because of this edict while living in Egypt. And if you just stop for a second and get out of the idea or the mode of just hearing Bible stories and not feeling them, take the time to feel what it would be like to be a parent and have someone typically watching over you to make sure that you killed your newborn child. A lot of emotion, a lot of fear. And so his parents choose not to. And I just wrote when thinking about this that if fear wasn't good, God wouldn't have given it to us. However, as usual, the darkness tends to leverage the light to try to use it for its own ability. I said it's not if you fear, it's what you fear. Fear is useful when it moves us forward, right? That God gave us fear in order to move us forward. You have the capacity to fear because God gave it to you. And so when you look at Moses' parents, they had a choice. Do we fear the king that could take our life and obey him and kill our child? Or do we fear God and try to keep our child at the expense of potentially losing our own life? And so there is nothing wrong with fear until you allow it to work against you or to try to keep you from what you sense to be God's will for your life. Fear is a capacity that God has given you for us to use for our benefit in moving us forward. It's not if you are going to fear. Everyone fears. It is whom you are going to fear. And so the truth of the matter is, Proverbs 1:7 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowing God. And that basically just means who you give the most weight to, or who has the loudest voice in your life. And what we see here with Moses' parents is, instead of the king of Egypt having the loudest voice, they allowed God to have the loudest voice in their life. And this idea of God is just a concept. It had never been proven to them. They had to have a sense of this greater being that was looking out for their good, and they put more faith and trust in this invisible, supernatural God, that God could direct them and lead them and guide them. I find it funny that we spend so much time trying to prove God. We don't need to prove God. God doesn't want to be proven. He wants to be experienced. Right? God's committed to being known through faith. And so let's jump into our verses just understanding this, that Moses' parents demonstrated an act of trust in God amidst fear and the unknown. It says, verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. A couple of quotes here for you. And I think this is important when it comes to this chapter and experiencing or looking at what faith looks like in motion. What does faith really look like? More than the word, more than what you've heard, more than your own experience. Like what does faith look like when a person has embraced faith? Like, what does that do to their life? What is their life going to look like? How will their life change? And I saw this quote or heard this quote this week from Richard Rohr, and I believe in it, and it's been my experience. He said, we do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. And just looking at the Old Testament and then also looking at Jesus calling his disciples, he invited people to move, to physically move and get out and experience this connection between heaven and earth through one word we call faith. That the only certainty in life is uncertainty, and that can be okay when we embrace this idea of faith. That not only is God working on our behalf, not only is God working in us, but God is working through us. That we don't think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. And so when Jesus wanted to impact the lives of his disciples, he went and he called them and he invited them to follow him. Not believe in him, follow him. And so if you feel as if the vibrance or the vitality between you and God is lacking, it could be because you have stopped following and moving, and instead you have stayed where you are via believing. We can always believe from a distance, but as Richard Rohr so accurately states here, we do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. If you do not change your physical patterns of what you do, you will always be who you are. And that's why we get so frustrated and we think that God gave up on us or that something is wrong with God when it has been in front of us all the time. One more quote from him. Faith is not overcoming obstacles. It is for experiencing them all the way through. Faith isn't about overcoming our obstacles. It helps us experience them and stay in them so they have their way with us. What a detriment it has been to the community of faith to think that somehow a relationship with God removes obstacles, when all we read throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament is obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. Wish away your obstacles, wish away your future. Wish away your obstacles, wish away your destiny. Wish away your problems, wish away your growth. Faith is not for overcoming obstacles. It is for experiencing them all the way through. Seeing that God ordains these things and allows these things to move us and to change us. So just taking a moment to make it super practical, how are you moving in new ways, going to new places, interacting with new people, doing different things that you've never done before? I purposefully confront myself and make myself get out and move regularly when I do not want to. The moment you stop moving is the moment you begin to die. Life is about movement. And it's a fight to embrace moving and keep our movement all the time. If this is true and we're looking at what faith looks like in motion, what does faith look like when someone has it inside of them, I want you to look at all of these verbs, all of these action words when it comes to the description of Moses and his life. That more than believing, Moses allowed what he believed to be true, which was not confirmed, to move him throughout his life. I'll read it again. Verse 24, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Verse 28, by faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. Moses allowed his faith to move him and to take on things that did not make sense. And that's why we say that if everything has to make sense, it will always make sense. And you don't want everything to always make sense. And so often we will give our adversary credit or another person credit when we come up against an obstacle, when that obstacle is something that has been allowed to come into our life to serve us, so that when we match it or pair it with faith, it accomplishes its purpose. Fear, do not fear, is a command. Last time I saw someone said that it's 365 times in the Bible, do not fear. As a command, do not fear. It's an interesting number, right? Just that every day of our life, we are to remind ourselves that we are not to fear, no matter what we're up against. You cannot outsmart God. Even if you are clever when it comes to getting in trouble, you cannot outsmart God. He knows the path that you take. He has seen you long before he called you, or long before you felt his calling on your life. And so how are you moving? How has your faith, this trust in God, served as a foundation for your life that, like the Hebrew people, which the author says our ancestors, rose them above the crowd? Because everything did not need to make sense. They could tune into what they thought they heard and let that drive them to make different decisions. Let's look at some of these words. Number one, Moses refused to be identified as the son of the king's daughter. He was committed to who he knew he was, right? So Moses, Jochebed, Moses' mother, puts him in a basket at some point in time when he gets too big and too loud to keep quiet. The fact that they hid him for 3 months is pretty amazing in the first place. But when he got too big and too loud, they put him in a basket, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him, and he is raised in the center of everything: agriculture, education. You know, when you think about the providence of God and his sovereignty, he guided that basket to be at the right place at the right time. If God can guide a screaming baby and a little basket thousands of years ago to be at the right place at the right time, what in the heck are you worried about? And we would not be in this room if that water was not ordained to take a screaming, crying baby that had no power to the right person at the right place. And because of her faith, Moses' mother was given the baby back to raise him for a certain period of time before she would give him back to the king's daughter, because it was the king's daughter that found him. And so there's just something about faith that when we can align ourselves with it and do our best to hear what we think God is saying, that everything tends to work out. And so when it comes to finding your destiny this morning, right, if you feel disconnected or you feel like you have no power, you need to understand that the first thing you need to do is embrace your identity and embrace who you know God made you to be. You need to, I'm talking in a way that if you're listening via Facebook, I'm sure you think that like it's skipping around. No, that's just me. It's really wild. First thing to embracing your destiny is like you have to be stubbornly committed to who God made you to be. Don't be somebody else. There is no anointing or no grace for you to be somebody else. There is only an anointing and a grace for you to be fully you. I tell you that God has played this like game with me my whole life. Like he'll show me someone else that maybe was doing something that I was doing and ask me if I could, would I change lives with them? And I keep saying no. I don't know that that's always going to be the case, but I keep saying no. Like I'm stubbornly committed to who God has made me to be. And that's a fight. One of the hardest things in the world is to be who God called you to be. And it gets really difficult when the Lord allows a certain amount of time to exist so that you can fully become you in order to fully receive what he has for you. Do not try to become anyone else. There is no power, no grace, no anointing for you to be anybody other than who God made you to be. You are very unique. And when the time is right, you will recognize why God made you you and why it was worth the wait. Moses refused. He very easily could have made his identity around being the son of Pharaoh's daughter. That came with a lot more privileges. But he was stubbornly committed to who he knew God made him to be. And you have to do the same if you're going to embrace your destiny. Number 2, he chose pain over pleasure. He chose pain over pleasure. That is a part of growth. Taking on and following what you think the Lord has called you to, starting that business, reaching out to that person, practicing forgiveness. These are all things where choosing pain over pleasure works out. And there is absolutely no way to get to a life that you are happy with, pleasure-wise, if pleasure is your objective. We get to pleasure as an outcome as we choose pain, following what we believe to be God's will for our life. Pleasure is an outcome. It is not a pursuit. When you pursue pleasure, you guarantee that you will not experience it. And your level of pleasure in life can be directly connected to your willingness to embrace and pursue pain. Right? When you give your body and you give your brain what it wants, never do you turn out satisfied. It's learning to embrace the difficulties and know that they will serve you when you embrace them with the right attitude. Number 3, if you're going to receive or experience what God has for you, you have to consider, like Moses did, that obedience is better than opportunities. Again, similar to pain versus pleasure, you can't pursue opportunities in life as your major objective. You have to pursue what you believe to be God's will for your life. This is what I think God is calling me to. Some of us need to get moving again. The older we get, the more we buy into a mentality, and that's what it is. It's a mentality that was invented here not long ago called retirement. And retirement is how they shut the door to your coffin sooner than it was supposed to be. You were made to live with purpose and to have a passion and get up each and every day excited about your day because you have a strong sense that what you're doing is what God called you to do. And so when we learn to do that, it gets so much better because obedience is far more rewarding than opportunities. Obedience creates opportunities. Pursuing opportunities tends to get in the way from opportunities themselves. So just let's do an assessment here for a second, and let's recognize the difference between what we feel like God has called us to do in this season of our life, and that could be, could break down right there, right? Like, I don't have any idea as to what God has called me to do. Well, there's probably one of two problems there. Number one, you're full of shame and guilt, and you're very insecure because nobody taught you that you are not your problems or you are not your dysfunction. You still, if you're alive and breathing, God has a purpose for you, and you're worthy to hear it, and you're worthy to receive it, and you have to believe that first before you can hear anything. People that don't feel as if they are worthy to hear God speak never hear God speak. And so that's probably the first issue, and the second issue is, well, really, that could be said for those are the two issues. You do not feel worthy of hearing the Lord's voice, and you're not expecting to hear the Lord's voice. And often that's because we don't realize that, I think it's Joseph Campbell that says all of the heavens, all of the hells, all of the devils, they're inside of us. And there's truth to that, in that God's voice and Satan's voice, or God's voice and our adversary's voice sounds like yours, because that's the vernacular you have to interpret it. And so you have to get to the spirit of what you hear is being said in order to figure out who it's coming from, right? I don't know that I should keep on going. I'm so discouraged. This isn't going to work out. They hate me. Those thoughts are pretty easy to identify the source and where they're coming from. You can do this. Take it on. Try it. Those are things that God would say, and it's just looking at the life of people like Moses to see what faith looks like in action. For heaven's sakes, take on something you think you can't do. If you think you have to be able to achieve it in order to take it on, you're never going to give God a chance to take it on with you and show you that you can do more things when he's with you than you could do when he's not. Do the impossible. Try to do the impossible. And some of us never see the impossible because we never believe that it's possible. Moses left Egypt and went out into the desert after being raised in a palace. Number 3, he left. Some point in time, the only thing left to do is leave. You got to leave the thing that makes you comfortable. You got to leave the thing that makes you think everything's okay. Moses never would have experienced that burning bush or anything else if he did not leave the comforts of Egypt. And you want to talk about brilliant. Moses understood that real wealth was in pursuing the Lord and leaving the things that would keep you from thinking you need to pursue the Lord with everything you have. And so often, the best way to add something to your life is to take something away. And it's amazing what the human body can do. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we get rid of the idea of safety and having everything that we need in order to make decisions. Moses left Egypt insane. Really, really insane. And so some of you, God's going to call you to leave a job maybe before you have another one. I said it. Right? At some point in time, you have to put your foot in the water in order for that water or that sea to part. And maybe that's the only, no maybe. For some of you, that's the only step that's left, is that God is waiting for you to put your foot into the impossible in order for the impossible to become possible. And you've been way too safe because you really haven't needed God living in Egypt. And so sometimes you have to leave the safety of what you've always known in order to experience God in a way you've never experienced him before. Man, oh man, I wish Christianity in America would quit being defined by morality, instead start being defined by the risks that people are willing to take when they think they hear God's voice. Last time I checked, our righteousness was as filthy rags. And so I don't know why we keep trying to make it anything better. When you leave, you've got to endure. If you give up when things get hard just because you left and you're experiencing different emotions and different feelings, you're not going to get to experience what you need to experience. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he got his second 40 years with people behind him. It's about enduring. It's about not giving up. Not growing weary in well-doing, for we'll reap when the time is right. Two-part equation there. You got to get to the place where you're ready to leave and you leave. And then the other part is you better have staying power. Because sometimes the Lord's going to leave you in the desert for 40 years in order to develop you and prepare you for that next season of your life. Never underestimate the Lord's commitment to leave you in a place that's super painful, because it's pain that develops us, not pleasure. And we don't have to have it all figured out, and we don't have to respond the right way all the time, because the right way to respond is just responding. There is no wrong way to respond. That's the trick. If you haven't gotten there yet, no big deal, you will. Moses, because he was willing to venture out and leave the comforts at home, made the invisible visible. And when we say here at City Church that our purpose is to help people experience the fullness of God's love through relationship, that's what we're talking about. That we make God come alive through this magic little word called faith. That we take on the impossible and it becomes possible, and people see something that doesn't seem to be from this earth, because God is partnered with a person through this idea called faith. This word kept is really interesting. It means to make. To make. And the last thing that we're told about Moses in this chapter is that he kept his word, and he put blood on the doorposts so that this spirit that was killing the oldest sons in Egypt, which you'll need to tune in and read the story for more, that the sons would be protected and their lives would be kept. And so at some point in time, even in the midst of his disappointment or his fear or not understanding everything or not understanding how things were going to turn out, Moses still kept his end of the bargain. And what did he do? He did what he thought he heard he should do. Faith is not certainty. Faith is something that gives us the chance to respond in the midst of uncertainty. The moment you are certain that you heard something or know something from God, it no longer becomes faith. It becomes certainty. Chances are that's not going to happen. And so if you're waiting around, waiting for certainty when it comes to God, that's not what pleases him. We're told that it is faith that pleases him. He kept his word, and he made the invisible visible, that the sons were spared, because he was willing to actually do something with what he thought he heard. Why do I keep saying that? That's interesting. What he thought he heard still is relevant to this day, because a lot of us spend way too much time waiting for certified mail from God with instructions. And that's not the people that change the world. The people that change the world are people that operate off of some sort of instinct that this is what I think God said. And I think the more we study and the more we learn, and if you want maybe a little bit of an indicator as to whether or not you're on the right path, I think the more we know about God, the more we realize we don't know. The more we pursue the Lord, the more uncertain we become, which that's not a bad thing. If uncertainty is a bad thing to you, that's your context. I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Just because you have a thought about something doesn't mean it's true. And so the truth does not exist in the center of you. The truth exists outside of you, and it is your responsibility by faith to pursue it through science. What is science? Oh, good question. It's the process of discovering truth. And sometimes it changes. Sometimes you'll sit in a room like this and you'll feel warm based on the reality that's around you or the reality that's within you. Sometimes you won't. And so that's why God would set us up to embrace uncertainty, so we were always aware and always hungry for the truth versus certifying it and losing out on life. If faith is what pleases God, and if faith is the firm foundation by which a life is built on, a successful life is built on, guess what God's committed to in your life? Uncertainty. Why? Because faith thrives in the midst of uncertainty. If you expect God to be committed to your certainty, you just don't understand. God is committed to the circumstance being uncertain around you so that you have to live your life on faith, which is going to serve you and help you flourish when it comes to the plan that he has for your life. Quit expecting God to make things better. God is going to further you by allowing things to be uncertain so your faith thrives, which means you don't have to have everything figured out. Sometimes the only reason we get upset and we're discouraged or deal with anxiety and fear is because we have lost sight of the fact that God is committed to your faith, not your sense of certainty. And so if everything has to feel right in order for it to be right, nothing will ever be right in your life. We've got to get past living life by our feelings. Some of what I have learned recently is that just because you have to get past living life by your feelings doesn't mean you shouldn't feel your feelings. That you should actually feel your feelings, but then acknowledge them as just feelings, not necessarily facts. And in acknowledging them, you'll have a better handle on dealing with them, especially when you apply faith to your life. Better make sure I don't have anything else to say. I'll leave you with this. If it always has to make sense, it will always make sense. And if it always makes sense, it won't make sense. Because you were made to live a life with God that is so much greater than anything you, in and of yourself, could ever imagine. If it always has to make sense, it will always make sense. And it won't make sense because you were made to live a life with God that is so much greater than anything you, in and of yourself, could ever imagine. Jesus, just take these words and do something with them. I mean, we can't do it in our own power, and we just acknowledge that. We need your help. Amen. So we're going to end the service the way we always do, and that is just by asking God this question: Lord, what are you saying to me in light of what's been said this morning? Maybe just one thing. What are you saying to me in light of what's been said this morning? And then if you like extra credit and getting ahead, you can ask yourself the second question, which is, what should I do about it this week? Question 1, what are you saying to me in light of what's been said? Question 2, what's one small thing I can do with that this week? We'll just take 2 to 3 minutes to reflect and ask ourselves those questions, and then we'll close our service with some announcements.
Okay. I love the part about just the practical application of movement. It reminded me of this week. I don't know what stories I would tell if I didn't have kids, so thank goodness for that. But this week, Evie, who's 2, she was like very grouchy and kept getting in trouble for not listening. And so Darren spoke sternly to her because she wasn't listening, and she didn't want to go anywhere. She wanted to stay home. She just wanted to be grouchy. And so he gave her like 10 minutes, and she's walking around, and she's being all mad, and then she goes up to him, and she said, I wasn't listening. I think I need to go see my friends. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're 2, how brilliant. You know you need to like remove yourself from this environment, go somewhere else. Like you're just gonna be like stewing in your grouchiness here. Everyone else is miserable around you. Like you need to move your feet and get out. Obviously that's not what she was thinking in her head, but that's what she was like, that's what she was doing. She was living into a new reality or allowing herself to get out of where she was and go somewhere else. And so she went and was grouchy around her friends, and it was easier for me. But I just think it's such a practical thing to remember, that sometimes you just need to move. Okay, prayer night is this Wednesday. I tell you this every week because it's true. Every week we come here on Wednesdays, 7 to 8, and we pray separately, together, meditate, worship. It's a really sweet time, so we would love for you to join us this week. There is childcare. So Easter is happening really soon. I know, wow. April 4th, it's the first Sunday this week, and we are going to, or this year, we are going to have 2 services to allow more people to come and it to not be like you guys are sardines in here. So 9 o'clock and 10:30. If you are joining us on Facebook, it's still gonna be a 9:30 message, so you can stop listening because nothing will change for you. If you're coming here, we're gonna meet at 9 and 10:30. Now, if you have kids, there's going to be babysitting at 9, City Church Kids program at 10:30. Do you hear the distinction? We are going to be pouring into your kids' spiritual life at 10:30. 9 o'clock, we're going to keep them alive. So that's your decision on when you want to come. But 2 services, 9 and 10:30 Easter Sunday. Okay. What's next? Giving. You can give online, text to give. There's the black bucket in the back. Okay, this week's breakouts. Communication and conflict breakout, which is out in the cafe area by the coffee. Conflict and the Enneagram. Okay, great. This breakout I've only heard great things. So we're talking about conflict and how it pertains to your particular number on the Enneagram. Stay in here if you want to hear a discussion about the message that Charlie just preached. And then the message 100 today, they're talking about a hope rooted in history, going through 1 Chronicles. So that's out in the core values room. So we're going to take about 10 minutes, get to the breakout of your choice, and then we will get started. Thank you to those of you who joined us on Facebook. We'll see you next week. Rest of you, well, all of you, have a good rest of your morning, and you can head to your breakouts. Hello, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for participating in our conversation with your comments and your questions. As always, we would love it if you would share the link to today's message. If you need anything, you want to know more about who we are, you can visit our website at citychurchdayton.com or send us an email to info@citychurchdayton.com. Have a great week.